True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick.
Kelly Ann Tinnis was just 2 days shy of her 14th birthday when she disappeared in her own neighborhood in 1989. In the days that followed, children stopped playing outside. Terrified neighbors began a harassment campaign of the Golub family, a family whose 2 sons had become suspects. The Golub home appeared like any other well-maintained suburban home on the outside, but what police found inside was shocking. This story shows us how we don't know our neighbors as well as we think we do, and how secrets inside of a family can fester and proliferate, infecting others. Join us at the Quiet End today for What Happened on Horton Road, a troubling and morbid case of 2 families, 1 suburban neighborhood, and 1 unforgettable crime.
So I picked a beer actually from Utica. It's a New York beer. This is from Matt Brewing Company in Utica. It's Saranac Black Forest Black Beer. It's a German Schwarzbier. Schwarz means black in German, so a black beer. Dark brown, nice thick coffee-colored head, a nice aroma, roasted grain, some light hops. Tastes just like you think it would from the nose. It's a little on the thin, and gotta be honest, a little nondescript. So it's not that great a beer, but it's okay. Nicely drinkable.
Okay, does the trick.
Does the trick.
I've never tried it, so why don't we open one up and give it a try?
Yeah, see what you think.
All right, Dick, follow me down to the Quiet End.
Let's head on down.
Why don't you go ahead and start our story?
Okay, yeah, this doesn't seem to be too much going on around here. I think it's post-Thanksgiving letdown.
Sure.
So on we go. 13-year-old Kelly Ann Tinnis lived on Long Island in the town of Valley Stream. She lived with her parents, Victoria and Richard, and her younger brother, Richie, in a middle-class suburban neighborhood on Horton Road. There were just 19 houses on Horton Road. Some were Cape Cod-style homes, some larger homes of red brick, all with neatly manicured lawns. Horton Road was a neighborhood of families with children, for the most part. A mixture of professionals, small business owners, blue-collar workers. There certainly wasn't a lot to do in Valley Stream. There was an ice rink and a pizza parlor. Kelly was a good skater, and the ice rink was one of her favorite places to hang out.
Before March 3, 1989, Horton Road residents shared a sense of community. They had a block party on Labor Day, the 4th of July, and Halloween each year. It was a good way to let the kids have fun while keeping an eye on them at the same time. Everyone knew one another, at least peripherally, and parents felt safe letting the kids walk to and from each other's houses to play. But March 3, 1989 marked the end of tranquility and peace on Horton Road. Life would never be the same for the people who lived there. For as long as they lived, they would remember the day when Kelly Ann Tinnis didn't come home, and the lives of 2 families would be destroyed. Kelly did go to school that day. Her father picked her up after school and dropped her at her home, as he did most days. And on the ride home, Kelly asked for permission to go to the ice rink with friends. But her dad said no. She needed to babysit her 8-year-old brother, Richie, until her mom got home from work.
Now, the Tinnis house was full, and you could even say it was a little bit on the crowded side. It had belonged to Kelly's grandparents. Now, they were elderly, and they continued to live in the house with the family. Now, on this particular day, the grandfather was in a hospital dying after a long battle with cancer. So this couple had purchased the house in the late 60s. They were certainly well known to all the neighbors.
Yeah, a lot of the neighbors there had been there a long time, for generations. Kelly's dad, Richard, was a big guy in his late 30s. He ran a business repairing cars. Victoria's Auto Repairs, named after his wife, made a decent living for him. And Victoria worked too, of course. She worked at a local physician's office. Kelly helped a lot at home with her grandmother, her little brother, and her dog Brutus. She rarely had friends to the house, but she did have a lot of friends, and she saw them in their homes and also at the ice rink. According to Kelly's friends, she rarely complained about her crowded house or the extra responsibilities that she had there. She really loved her family and just saw it as her responsibility to pitch in.
A nice kid.
Yes, very nice kid from all accounts.
Now, Kelly had 4 really close girlfriends, and these girls all had nicknames for each other. Kelly's nickname was Sky because of her big blue eyes. She was tall, 5'8", and her hair was brown with auburn highlights. And she was known for her wide smile and her pretty much always happy disposition. Now, maybe it was because of her family responsibilities, but Kelly was more organized than most girls her age. She had a calendar in her room, and she could be counted on to be where she was supposed to be at any given time. She hadn't yet had any boyfriends, and she didn't drink and didn't do drugs.
Kelly had a girlfriend the same age as her on Horton Road, Sharon Stonell. Sharon lived just 5 doors down, so Kelly walked over there quite often to visit. The Golub family was one of the quieter families on Horton Road. They were a bit older than most and not super friendly. The father, John, was in his 50s, very serious, and a hard worker. He operated a gas station in a neighboring town, and he also did car repairs. His wife, Elizabeth Golub, in her late 40s, and on the heavier side, was more friendly than her husband. Elizabeth had friends in the neighborhood, and she attended the Roman Catholic Church, where her 3 children had had their confirmations. She worked full-time at a local transportation company in the office. But what Elizabeth really enjoyed was shopping at garage sales and flea markets. That was her passion. She would have called herself a collector if you'd asked her, but everyone would soon find out that she was a hoarder.
Before hoarder became a noun.
Yeah, wasn't really a well-known thing back then. True.
Now, the Golubs had 3 kids. One was Adele, the oldest. She was a graduate of college. 21-year-old Robert, and 14-year-old John Jay. Robert and John Jay still lived at home. Adele lived in Manhattan and worked for an accounting firm.
Kelly's very best friend was Roberta Gross. They had known each other since they were preschoolers. They attended Woodmere Middle School, went to the movies, ice skated, and they were just beginning to talk about boys. Neither of them had dated yet. Kelly and Roberta routinely talked on the phone after school. Roberta had an after-school job where she was able to use the phone. So March 3rd was a Friday, and Kelly's birthday was that Sunday. The plan was for Kelly's closest girlfriends, 4 of them, to take Kelly out to dinner Friday night, invite her over for a sleepover at Roberta's, and surprise her with a slumber party. Kelly's mother had already agreed to this with Roberta. After her father dropped her at home, Kelly called her friend Jennifer, but there was no answer. Then she called her dad at work and asked to go to the ice skating rink again. He again told her no. It was still another hour until her mom would be home, and then she could go. Kelly called another friend after that and complained about having to babysit her brother. She said she was thinking of just leaving for the ice rink anyway. The phone rang at the Tinnis house shortly after that, and Richie answered. The caller said that his name was John, and he asked to speak to Kelly. So Kelly took the call, spoke for less than a minute. Then 20 minutes later, at 3:10 p.m., Kelly told her little brother Richie that she was going to her friend Nicole's house just down the street and she'd be right back. Richie wasn't used to being left alone at all. So after just 5 minutes of Kelly being gone, he decided to go find her. At 3:15, he walked down the block to Nicole's house, but Nicole said that Kelly hadn't been there. 6-year-old Harry Finney, who Kelly had babysat for in the past, was out playing in front of Sharon Stonell's house, which was between Nicole's house and the Golub house. Harry told Richie that he had seen Kelly, and she'd gone into John Jay's house, the Golub house. Both of the young boys went over to the Golub's front door and they rang the doorbell several times, but nobody answered there. So Richie went back home, and he was back home at 3:45 by himself.
No big sister. Now, at this point, it's kind of like she's just vanished. She wasn't where she told her brother she was going to be.
Right.
And nobody's seen her except for the one little kid who said she went into the Golub house.
Yes.
But they couldn't get anyone to answer the door.
No, it was really strange.
It's very strange. So Richie got back home and he called his mom and his dad to tell him that Kelly had left him alone. Victoria said she would be home within the hour. Richie mentioned the Golubs house to his dad, and Dad told him, go find your sister. So he told Richie to beat on the door and call out for Kelly until someone opened the door. Kelly barely knew the Golubs. She had no reason to be in their house, and she needed to get home. I'm sure the parents are kind of pissed off at her now. She's not watching her little brother. She bailed on him.
Yeah, initially they're angry, right? They think, why would she do that?
There's no reason.
Right. But before he went over, Richie took it upon himself to call the Golub house several times. He found the number in the phone book. Remember those?
Phone books?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, those were cool. But there was no answer, so he walked back to the house. And he pounded on the Golub's door, yelling for Kelly, and he did this for several minutes. But now he heard loud rock music blasting inside the house. Not to give up so easily, though, Richie went to the sidewalk and started yelling out for Kelly, yelling her name. And then he got a little bit clever. He started yelling that Brutus is loose, her dog, because he thought, well, if she knows her dog's loose, she'll come out right away. She loves that dog. But still, nobody came to the door. There was no response at all. Just a house with the door shut and loud music playing.
Yep, so Richie went back to the house, and Roberta, her friend, called again for Kelly. She called 2 more times in the next hour or so. And Roberta is getting more and more concerned about where Kelly could be. Now, Victoria got home a little after 5, and Richard was a few minutes after her. And they were upset, like you said, because this wasn't something that Kelly had ever done, leaving her brother alone like this.
No, not at all. She was very reliable.
So the parents called her friends, but no one had seen Kelly. So at first they were angry, but then they very quickly became worried. Victoria walked down the block, knocking on doors of their neighbors and friends. No one knew where Kelly had gone. Finally, Sharon Stonewall told Victoria that she had seen Kelly enter the Golubs' house after 3 p.m. Now this supported what Richie had told his mother and father. But it was strange. The Golubs did have a 14-year-old son, John Jay, but Kelly and John Jay weren't friends. I mean, they don't hang out together, didn't do anything together. They're just proximate in age.
Yeah, so I think most parents would remember a time when their child disappeared like that, and you just panic.
You do.
You don't know what to do. And unfortunately, in this case, it turned out to be your worst nightmare, the worst thing you could imagine. There were 5 calls from the Tinnis house to the Golubs house between 4:53 p.m. and 5:30 p.m. that day. Just before 6 p.m., Richard Tinnis called the house again, and finally he was able to speak with Elizabeth Golub. Elizabeth said that Kelly had not been at the house, and it actually took her a moment to remember who Kelly was because these 2 families weren't that friendly. Richard asked to speak to John Jay, who was the 14-year-old son of the Golubs, and Elizabeth did hand over the phone to John Jay Golub. John Jay told Kelly's dad that he hadn't seen Kelly for several days, in fact. But Richard thought he sounded nervous. He seemed really anxious to get off of the phone, too. So he didn't know if that was just because he was nervous talking to an adult, or if he knew something he was hiding.
It seems that, I know it hasn't been a long time that Kelly's been gone.
Right.
But she never did anything like this. I'm thinking people are starting to get a little fearful about what's going on here.
Yeah, but I don't think John Jay was getting fearful.
No.
He was kind of a teenager with an attitude. We'll get to more of that.
Well, I think John Jay is saying, I haven't seen her, but we have 2 people that said that Kelly went into his house.
Right.
That's going to set off alarms.
Absolutely it is.
If I'm dead.
Sure.
So Kelly had been expected to meet with her girlfriends at Roberta's house. It was going to be at 8 o'clock that evening. This is her birthday celebration. So the other girl showed up, but Kelly didn't. Anxiety and a sense of dread fell over the girls as they had their dinner without the birthday girl. And as they were walking back to Roberta's house, Kelly's parents pulled up beside them and asked again if they knew anything. The slumber party was canceled, and Roberta cried herself to sleep. She was so worried about her friend Kelly.
Yeah, and by now it's nighttime. The parents are frantic. This isn't something that Kelly would do on her own. They're really worried. So the Tinnis continued to make calls and knock on doors until late into the night, and they drove around the neighborhood looking for any sign of Kelly. So when I was reading about this case, I was thinking, well, why didn't they call the police right away? You're supposed to call because within a few hours, if a child's going to be killed, they'll be killed that soon. But then I'm thinking back to the 80s, and that's not the way life worked, really. If your teenage girl was missing for a while, you looked for her and she turned up. 99.9% of the time. She forgot what time it was, she ran off with a friend, and they show up.
They almost always do.
Yeah. So just before midnight, a member of the Tinnis family called the Golub home again, and she explained that Kelly had been missing since the afternoon, and neighborhood children had said that they had seen her entering the Golub house. So Elizabeth woke up her son, John J., who again denied knowing anything about Kelly's whereabouts. And it seems like Elizabeth just took his word for that. So the parents are frantic. It's the middle of the night by now. And about 3 a.m., Roberta's father answered a call from Kelly's Aunt Linda. She was the one who was making calls for the family. And she asked again if Roberta knew anything about where Kelly might be. So Roberta's father, he's worried too. He woke up Roberta to ask her again, but Roberta had nothing else to share. And when she learned that it was the middle of the night and Kelly still wasn't home, she was even more upset. And of course by now the Tinnis parents are in a panic.
Yeah, it just seemed impossible to them that Kelly would run away. And again, she's not that kind of kid.
Right.
Plus she had her birthday coming up and she had plans for the whole weekend. So the parents couldn't make sense of how Kelly had never made it to Nicole's house or why she would have gone into the Golub house.
Right. When it was 1:30 a.m., Richard Tinnis had called the police, and they told him to wait until the next morning before they could help him search. So that wasn't much help. But after the sun came up that Saturday morning, Richard and Victoria Tinnis walked back to the Golub's house. That's really the only lead they have, is that she was seen going into that house. So they told Elizabeth that Kelly had not returned, and of course they were desperate to find her. And Elizabeth, she's a mom, she was sympathetic. They asked to speak to John Jay again because Sharon Stonell insisted she had seen Kelly go inside their house. So Elizabeth let the couple into the entryway as she went upstairs to get John Jay from his room. And this was the first time that they had been inside the home, so they were really surprised at the condition of the house. To say it was cluttered and messy is a big understatement. The outside of the house was neat and well kept like everybody else's, but on the inside it was so full of junk that they couldn't even see the living room furniture. There were just piles of trash and clothes and everything all over the place. So Elizabeth woke up John Jay. He was sleeping, and he again said that he had not seen or spoken to Kelly. Elizabeth relayed this to Kelly's parents, who returned home, and then they called the police again for help. This time a detective called back at the Tinnis house and got a description of Kelly from her aunt.
Yeah, and so they started getting involved in the case. Detectives called Kelly's friends to ask if something had been going on with Kelly that her parents wouldn't know about. They all said, nah, nothing like that. Kelly didn't seem to be the kind of teen who would have run away.
Well, and remember, this is before there were apps where you could chat with people. This is before catfishing and the internet and having a cell phone.
That's right.
So you can't look for her that way. You can't search the computer and see if she'd been talking to someone online. So they really just have to do like the old-fashioned going door-to-door, canvassing, asking questions.
That's how you do it, right?
Right.
So Kelly's parents told the detectives about witnesses having seen Kelly entering the Golub house on Friday afternoon. And the Golubs were insisting that Kelly had never been there. But no one reported seeing Kelly after she allegedly entered the house. So the trail looked like it led to the Golub house, and that was it. It just stopped there.
Right. So detectives have to definitely pay attention to that. That's really their only lead.
Yeah.
After the interview with Kelly's parents, the detectives went to the Golub house. And this wasn't really an unusual case for them at this point. Like I said, teenagers went missing every day. They turned up in a day or two. And no matter how happy or reliable a teenager might seem, Kelly could have run away or gone off with someone. I mean, these things happened all the time.
Sure. Well, and don't forget she got a phone call.
Yes.
Just before she left.
Yes, from someone named John, which makes me think of John J. Golub.
John J.
Yep.
Right. But she got the phone call and then not very long afterwards told her brother she was running up to Sharon's house or whoever's house.
Nicole's, yeah. Well, right, because if it was some kind of boyfriend situation, maybe she would have lied to her little brother. That wouldn't be unheard of.
Yeah.
She could have been purposely going over to whoever called her. So it's a mystery.
At this point it is.
The thing that made this case worrisome, really, was that Kelly had disappeared when her friends were planning a party for her, and her birthday was coming right up. That doesn't seem like a time when someone would run off. So they really had to talk to the Golub boy. And Elizabeth Golub, she had pitched in. She was trying to help with the search that day. She stopped at houses on the block and asked if anyone knew anything. Then she went back to the Tinnis house to ask if they had found Kelly. Victoria told her that Sharon Stonell had seen Kelly enter the Golub's house on Friday afternoon, which Elizabeth had heard that from the police as well, right?
Right, but Sharon wasn't changing her story.
No, not at all. Nope.
I saw Kelly go into the Golub's house.
Yes. So when she got back home, Elizabeth was pretty serious, and she got tough with John Jay and insisted that he tell her the truth. But he continued to deny that he had seen Kelly. So Elizabeth marched him across the street to the Stonell house, and Sharon Stonell was convinced that she had seen Kelly go into their house. But she said she hadn't seen who had let Kelly inside the house.
So when Elizabeth was, while she's at the Stonell house, Elizabeth sees detectives walking up to her porch. So she and John Jay walked back over to them. And the detective said that they were investigating a missing person, Kelly. And he asked to go inside so that he could interview both Elizabeth and John Jay. So once they're inside, John Jay said to the officer he didn't know Kelly very well at all, and he hadn't seen her in days. When asked if there was anyone else in the house who might know something, John Jay said that his brother Robert was home.
Yeah, Robert's 21.
Right. He's the one who's living at home with John Jay.
Right.
So John Jay went upstairs to get his brother, and a few minutes later, Robert and his friend Paul Zarella came downstairs. So there wasn't any place to sit for the interviews because every piece of furniture was covered with piles of clothing and other debris. The detective stood as Robert sat on the stairs.
Yeah, John Jay was a pretty good-looking kid, average height, but his brother was extremely short. He was barely 5 feet tall, but he was very built up from weightlifting. So John Jay and Robert did not look a thing alike. The interview with Robert only lasted for a few minutes. He said that he only knew Kelly by sight from around the neighborhood, but he hadn't seen her for weeks, and he had no idea where she could be. When asked where he had been on Friday, he said that he had been home all day, but he denied seeing Kelly or having any kind of relationship with her. Robert would further explain that his brother John Jay had had 2 of his friends over to the house on Friday afternoon, and the boys had played Nintendo. But each time Robert answered a question, he would look over at his brother for confirmation. This was weird.
You're not supposed to interview them together.
Right. I know. That's a mistake. Good catch. But this made the detectives wonder if these kids were hiding something. So after that, a detective did take John Jay into another room to get independent confirmation of Robert's answers, and his story was unchanged. But they had already asked questions with both of them there, so some of the damage was already done.
Detectives then went over to the Stonell house and spoke with Sharon, who told them that she had seen Kelly enter the Golub home at 3:15 Friday afternoon. Now, Sharon's mom hadn't seen Kelly enter the house, but she had seen Kelly walking down the street in that direction about the same time. She told the detectives, too, about 6-year-old Harry Finney, who is also a neighborhood kid who said he saw Kelly enter the Golub house. And he also said that John Jay had been the one who let her in.
Yes, so this Harry Finney story was new to the detectives at this point. So next they went to the Finney house to get his statement. And little Harry was very confident that he had seen Kelly go into the Golub house after John Jay had opened the front door. So at that point, a decision was made they needed to search the Golub house. So they called in some uniformed officers to help.
Well, it certainly sounds like they have enough to search the house. They have 2 independent observers who said they saw Kelly enter it.
Right.
And nobody saw her come out.
So I think if they didn't get permission, they would be able to get a search warrant, but it would take a little longer.
Yeah.
But by then, it's almost noon, and the detectives returned to the Golubs' house, and Elizabeth answered, and they asked for her permission to search her house. They needed her to sign a consent form to search without the warrant, and the police felt that Kelly may have been hiding in the house without the parents knowing. So Elizabeth invited the police into her home as she looked over the form, and it was explained to her that they wouldn't be searching through her drawers or private things or looking for drugs. What they were looking for was a living teenage girl who was last seen entering that house. They didn't think Elizabeth was lying to them, but they knew that some teenagers hide in one another's houses and trick their parents. So Elizabeth consented to the search, and John Jay told her she should go ahead and consent. So that's significant. Then her husband John was called and he came home. He spoke to the police for just a minute or two, and he signed the release as well. So a female detective went to search upstairs with Elizabeth, while John Golub and a male detective started their search down in the basement. And I guess that's how they do it. They start bottom and top and meet in the middle, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, like the rest of the Golub home, the basement was extremely cluttered. In fact, it almost looked like the family had tossed things, including broken glass and trash, down the stairs. I can just picture this, you know.
Oh, I've seen pictures. It's bad.
The floor was almost completely obstructed, and there was no path to walk in or space to move around in. So in order to search, they needed to use their flashlights.
Well, yeah, and it was virtually impossible to move around without touching anything, because there's no path.
Yeah, so they're going to contaminate the crime scene if she is there.
Yeah.
They can't help it.
No. Well, right beneath the steps, there was a closet with the door closed, with a steamer trunk in front of it. And beside the closet, there was the room about the size of a small bedroom. So the police asked John Golub what was behind the door with the trunk, and he said that was a storage area. So the 2 men moved the trunk out of the way so the policeman could open the door part way. And he looked into this closet with his flashlight and saw a green sleeping bag that was zipped up, and it was laying against the wall in kind of a strange position. So he crawled into the closet, while John Golub moved on to search more of the basement. But when the officer unzipped the bag just a few inches, he saw a human leg, covered with dried blood. And he hadn't been expecting this, not at all.
I'll bet not.
He gasped and jumped away.
I would scream.
Yeah. Well, and there's not a lot of violent crime in that area, so they weren't used to this kind of thing.
Oh, not at all.
Not that I don't think anyone gets used to it.
So when the officer called out to the other officers, John Golub came over to the closet and said, you know, what is it? What's going on? Is there a body? Yes, it was.
That was strange, but I could see if it was a really drastic reaction, you might think of that.
Well, yeah, plus they know what the reason they're searching the house is.
Yeah.
You know, they're looking for a missing teen.
Exactly.
So, yeah, you could say, is that a body? Sure.
So the basement's now a crime scene. As the officer looked around the area with his flashlight, he noticed blood stains that he hadn't noticed before. There was so much clutter that it hadn't been seen at first. The clutter made the crime scene difficult to manage without disturbing things, like I said, but it also made it difficult for the killer to clean the scene. So it worked both ways.
So news was quickly getting out in the neighborhood. As you said, it's a small neighborhood and a pretty close-knit neighborhood.
Very much so, yes.
They're all friends.
Yep.
So the homicide unit was notified, and then one of the detectives realized that someone needed to notify Kelly's parents, so detectives quickly walked down the street to notify Victoria and Richard Tinnis. They didn't want them hearing it from anyone else.
Yeah, it's
now,
just
the couple
tragic.
was exhausted, but they were holding out some hope. But seeing the detective's face as he arrived just snuffed that hope right out, and they knew they weren't going to get good news.
No, when they were told their daughter's body had been found in the Golub's basement, Victoria, Kelly's mom, let out a miserable cry that could be heard all the way down the road. Neighbors began crying and comforting each other, and Richard embraced Victoria, and they were just crying. Kelly was still in the sleeping bag, so the police had no idea how she had died. When a homicide detective arrived on the scene, he asked John Golub why the condition of the basement had not been reported as a possible break-in. But John explained this was the normal condition of their basement.
Yeah, that's almost funny, you know.
It almost is, yeah. It's like he just said, well, Elizabeth's not a very good housekeeper, which is the understatement of the year. The entire house was a mess, and that was just the way they lived. It's hard to imagine.
It sure is, to that degree.
Right, right.
So when Kelly's exposed leg was touched, the detective identified slippage of the skin, which was a sign that the body had begun to decompose. Now, though Kelly had only been missing for a day at this point, being inside the sleeping bag had held her body heat up and sped up decomposition.
Ugh.
Her body was left where it was until the medical examiner could get there.
Well, by this time, Robert Golub had left the house, and John Jay was still upstairs. Kelly's brother was telling the police that he had taken a call on his home phone from John Jay just before Kelly had left the house and disappeared.
Oh, now it's John Jay, so...
Well, that's what Richie said.
Okay.
John Jay was taken into an upstairs bedroom along with his father for another interview by the police. According to John Jay, he had come home from school with two friends, Mick Donnell and Chris Earle. They had played Nintendo after seeing Robert for a few moments. Then Robert went upstairs, he said, and John Jay and his two friends left the house soon after that. The boys played basketball with friends nearby, and then they had gone to the pizza parlor to eat. Then John Jay said he returned home alone at about 5 p.m. But while they were upstairs, detectives noticed that Robert's bedroom had no door. A sheet was hung in the doorway. The Golubs would explain that Robert had been taking John Sr.'s clothes without permission, so his father had removed the door and thrown it away. But other more sinister reasons would be suggested by acquaintances of the Golub family, including that Robert had been using drugs and that Robert had been molesting his younger brother in that room. And I don't believe the truth of that has ever really been decided.
He said, she said.
Yeah, but, down on the main floor talking to Elizabeth, there's nowhere to sit. Every chair and table were just piled with clutter and trash. The dining room had heaps of clothing and papers on the table. The kitchen counters were even covered as well. So this was just a very peculiar family situation. The police would soon learn that each family member ate their meals in their individual rooms, by themselves, never together. Take coloring your hair at home to the next level with Madison Reed. You deserve gorgeous professional hair color delivered to your door for less than $25. Madison Reed gives you gorgeous, multidimensional, healthy hair with your choice of over 45 multitonal shades that have been developed by master colorists who really know how to blend nuances of cool, warm, light, and dark. Many of our listeners have written to tell me how Madison Reed hair color has improved their lives, and I totally get it. Madison Reed delivers gray-covering, natural-looking color to my door. Now I'm free from salon visits, and I'm saving a fortune while my hair looks and feels great. So I'm always happy to recommend Madison Reed to our listeners. It's affordable, it's convenient, and it's super high quality. We're busy women. We deserve gorgeous professional hair color delivered to our doors on our schedule for less than $25. And you can find your perfect shade at madison-reed.com. True Crime Brewery listeners get 10% off plus free shipping on their first color kit with our promo code BREWERY. That's code BREWERY at madison-reed.com. So this eating individually in their rooms is super strange.
Yeah, I gotta say it is.
I mean, why would you do that? It just doesn't seem conducive to any kind of family relationship. It's just weird, like they're in prison or something.
Well, yeah, and I'm getting the sense that this is not anything like a normal household anyway.
Yeah, I know, but Adele went off to Manhattan, got a good job, getting married. She seemed pretty normal.
She escaped.
Although, on the outside, you just don't know, I guess.
No, you don't.
So, by 1 p.m. that Saturday, the crime scene unit was at the Golub house. The basement had lots of physical evidence, but the cluttered conditions made the handling of the scene quite difficult. Photos were taken before anything was moved, and it would end up taking close to 2 weeks of 24-hour work to process this scene.
And at 2 o'clock, 2 medical examiners arrived. A homicide detective moved the sleeping bag from the basement closet and laid it on the basement floor where a spot had been cleared. Now, there were old lace curtains that were saturated with blood that had leaked from the sleeping bag. There was a pool of blood beneath the curtains. And in the pool of blood, there was a knife. So as they looked at it, they decided or said it looked like a long-bladed bayonet, most likely an antique from World War I.
And unzipping the bag revealed a horror scene. The odor was as overwhelming as the sight of Kelly's completely destroyed body. Her face was swollen and discolored, with massive bruising. Her throat had been slit so deeply that her cervical vertebrae were exposed. Patches of hair had been pulled from her head. Her bra was soaked with blood and knotted around her neck. Her entire body, from her chest to her genital region, had been slit and laid open. Her organs were fully exposed. Plus, she had long, superficial cuts all over her body. So even the experienced homicide detectives had never seen such a horror scene. She was brutally, brutally murdered. So this seemed to be the actions of someone stronger than 14-year-old John J. Golub. Plus, it was so brutal it's hard to imagine a young teen being capable of such violence.
Yeah, so they probably looked at the big brother, Robert, who's very muscular. Perhaps he's on steroids.
Yeah, because John Jay and his friends were all very slightly built. So they decided they needed to find Robert.
Yeah, he would seem to be a more likely suspect, wouldn't he?
He would, yeah.
Police officers were out canvassing the neighborhood and taking statements. John Jay's friends, Donnell and Earl, were located, and another detective interviewed John Jay again. Now, because John Jay may have called the Tinnis house for Kelly before she left the house, he was still a witness, and there was a possibility that more than one of the brothers had killed Kelly.
A strong possibility, and that's what a lot of the neighbors would think, that both boys were involved. So the Golubs had a friend who was a lawyer, and he arrived shortly after the homicide unit arrived. And he was representing the Golub family, he said, with the exception of Robert Golub, who hadn't been located. He had left the house. He was out of there. Robert Blair, an uncle of Kelly Ann Tinnis, arrived at the Golub house and asked to identify Kelly's body. He didn't want her parents to have to do it. But of course at this time he has no idea of the condition of her either. But he was a former policeman and he was acting as the Tinnis family spokesperson. So he was allowed to identify Kelly by looking at a Polaroid picture. But they only showed him her bruised and swollen face. They covered the rest of her body so he wouldn't have to see it. When he returned to the Tinnis house to tell Kelly's parents that he had identified her, Victoria's screams could be heard all over the road by all the neighbors, from inside the house.
So John, Elizabeth, and John J. Golub were interviewed again. John Sr. said that he had left for his Getty service station Friday morning around 6:45. He worked there all day with his crew, his staff. Elizabeth had driven John J. to school at 7:40, and then she had driven to her job where she worked all day. John J. was confirmed to have been at school all day that day. He got home just before 3, and his 2 friends were with him. And as they arrived, his big brother Robert was getting mail from the mailbox. Robert had been unemployed since the previous summer. And this is March of the next year, so at least 6 months.
Long time, yeah. Not doing much at all.
Nope. Now, John Jay said that he and his friends played some video games until 3:45, and then they went out and played basketball on a court that was nearby.
Yeah, so the dad, John Sr., finished working and ran some errands at 4:45. Then he saw John Jay at a bus stop and picked him up and drove him home, so they got home at 4:55. Elizabeth went grocery shopping after work and was home preparing dinner at 5:30. Then she dished out portions for each family member around 6, and as they always did, each family member took their plate into his or her bedroom to eat alone.
Dinner's ready. Okay.
See you later.
Yep.
Weird.
Got my plate. I'm off.
Well, you hear so much about how families should eat dinner together.
Oh, yeah.
And I know I've been guilty of not eating with the family because everyone's got different schedules or even eating in front of the TV. But this idea of each member going to their own individual bedroom is just beyond bizarre.
You can say that again.
So Elizabeth said, though, and this is interesting, she had to wake Robert up from a deep sleep to call him for dinner. So he had fallen asleep that afternoon. John Jay was grounded, and his parents believed that he stayed in that night, but John Jay had actually gone out with friends for a few hours. He said he got back around 10:15 p.m. John Sr. had been in bed at 9 p.m. because he got up super early, and Elizabeth had gone to bed at 11 p.m. She said that Robert was home by 11 p.m. after going to a bar with his friend Paul. But John Jay was considered to be pretty evasive and less cooperative as time went on. With his parents and the family's attorney beside him, he became a bit of a smartass and seemed cocky, and really didn't show any concern at all for Kelly or her family, which made him, very unlikable.
Unlikable and maybe a suspect.
Absolutely.
Now, Kelly had been found nude, so finding her clothing was going to be important to the crime scene unit. The processing of the basement began at 6 p.m. It was just starting to get dark, so floodlights were put up surrounding the house and in the basement. Television news crews were there as well, also with lights and cameras. When Kelly's body was removed from the house on a stretcher, neighbors were standing in the street, crying and comforting each other.
So Robert Golub was found. He was a few blocks away in a van with his friend Paul. The police followed the van to a parking lot behind a movie theater. They were then pulled over, and Robert was asked to come to the police station for an interview. And Robert asked if it was about some outstanding traffic tickets. But he was told no, this is about Kelly and Tinnis. So what do you think of that? Is that some kind of subterfuge? Why did he say that?
Oh, sure.
Trying to look innocent.
Why are you picking me up? This must be about my parking tickets or something.
Yeah, because I guess at this point, if he's innocent, he wouldn't know that Kelly had been found, right?
Right.
Yeah. So Robert waived his right to an attorney, and he answered questions at the police station. His friend Paul Zarella was also interviewed. According to Paul, he had picked up Robert at about 9 p.m. Friday night at his house. They bought some pot, smoked it, went to a bar, then ate junk food outside of a convenience store. He said he then dropped Robert at the Golub house around 1 a.m. But Robert hadn't mentioned Kelly and Tinnis at all that night to him. But also remember that Elizabeth said that Robert was back at 11 before she went to bed. So there's a discrepancy there.
Yeah, just a bit.
Couple hours.
Yeah. So Robert again denied seeing Kelly that Friday. He said he hadn't seen her in weeks. He gave fingerprint and hair samples and seemed cooperative. This guy is stocky, bulked up from weightlifting. He was proud to tell the police that he could bench press twice his body weight. Now, he said that he woke up at 10:30 Friday morning. He ate breakfast and walked to the market where he bought a muscle magazine. He said that he read the magazine most of the day and watched TV in his bedroom. He left the house a second time in the afternoon to get the mail. Then his brother and his two friends arrived after they were finished in school. Robert said he went inside and heard the boys playing video games as he resumed watching TV in his room. Then he drifted off to sleep.
Yeah, Robert said he was woken at 6:30 p.m. by John Jay, who told him there was a girl on the phone for him, and he declined to take that call. At 7 p.m., according to him, his mother told him that dinner was ready, and then he had eaten it in his room along with 3 beers that he drank. At 8:30, he went out with a friend to a few different bars. Then he returned home around midnight, and everyone else was in bed when he got home. So his times are different from Elizabeth's.
Yes, they are. Maybe he's trying to set up a different alibi or something, right?
I don't know, because we think that Kelly would have been dead by then anyway, but who knows what was going on as far as cover-ups. But Robert claimed he hadn't seen Kelly, but that she had called his brother John Jay 2 or 3 times per day. He said he had last been in the basement about 2 weeks ago, and telephone records didn't show his claim about Kelly Tinnis calling their house at all. There was a call made from the Golubs' house to the Tinnis house, though. But Robert, John Jay, and also John Jay's 2 friends all denied calling the Tinnis house that afternoon to ask for Kelly.
Okay.
But somebody had done it, and
So
that was confirmed.
The phantom phone call.
Yeah, it was confirmed to come from the Golub house. Remember, these are all home phones.
Right. So these landlines, and you can look at that and say that there was a call from that particular phone number.
Absolutely. There'd actually been a lot of progress in the late 80s that made it easier than it had been.
So someone's not telling the story or the truth.
Absolutely. I mean, somebody killed her, right? It wasn't a stranger coming into their house, killing her and leaving.
No.
No.
So John Jay's friend Donnell admitted that the boys had smoked a little weed that day, but Earl said, nope, not me. But they did both agree that Robert had his stereo on and was playing rock music. John Jay had snuck in and turned the music all the way up, so it was impossible to hear anything in the house. Well, that's interesting. When did this occur?
Well, we don't know, but we remember that little Richie, when he went to the house, said the music was blaring.
Yeah, when he went back.
Second time.
The second time.
Right. So the friend Donnell said that John Jay had not been out of his sight long enough to have killed anyone that day. He said that a confused-looking Robert had stuck his head into John Jay's room at one point while they were playing a game and asked who had turned up the stereo, but they hadn't given him any answer. So it seems like the kids are being honest as far as we can tell, but we do see a lot of contradictions with Robert especially.
Yeah, we do.
More blood was found in the Golubs' basement. There was blood on the doorknob of the room where Kelly had been killed. There was blood on the carpet and on many of the items in the area, and we know there were a lot of items. One item that was there was a box of 4 briefcases in a box, and this was something that Elizabeth had purchased at a garage sale. It was on the far side of the basement near where Kelly had been killed. So when they first looked, the box looked like it was sitting in water, but it was actually in blood. One of the cases was still wrapped in plastic, but the top 2 had red-brown stains all over them. Inside these cases, they found a turtleneck, 2 white sneakers, white panties, black socks, a white t-shirt, a green sweater, a brown leather jacket, and a pair of black jeans. The clothing was stained and, in some parts, soaked with blood, and this was the clothing that Kelly had been wearing that day.
And next to that, there was a piece of glass that was also smeared with blood. A soaked and folded up blue tablecloth was also found. It was later speculated that the killer had held the piece of glass with the tablecloth to protect his hands. The double edges of this glass matched the superficial cuts that were found on Kelly's upper body.
Yeah, because the superficial cuts didn't look like they came from the bayonet, but the horrible cuts to her organs and her body appeared to be made by that bayonet that they found. John Sr. actually asked the police about his antique pocket watch collection, which he kept in one of those briefcases in the basement. But the pocket watches were no longer there, although there were some circular cutouts in foam that indicated that the collection had been there at one time, and it would turn out that Robert had pawned these watches just days before Kelly had been killed.
Just finding out more and more stuff about this family, huh?
Yeah, a lot of secrets.
Now, a print was found on the molding of the closet where Kelly had been found, and the print was made in blood. And it was in a position where someone might have put his hand on the molding if he was leaning or bracing himself against the wall. So they lifted the print and rushed it to the lab to compare it to Robert's prints. Now, the print wouldn't be seen as a match until one of the detectives compared it to the skin between Robert's thumb and forefinger and made a 12-point match.
Yeah, so from what I've been reading about fingerprints, 12 points is very good. In most cases, they'll accept 7 or 8 points as a positive match of a fingerprint. So suspicions of Robert are continuing to grow. He was the only person who had been in the Golub home alone for a significant amount of time that day when Kelly was killed. Now another thing, he also had small cuts and abrasions on his hands. His explanation was that he had cut himself while changing weights at the gym. These were small cuts, and it wasn't possible to tell how long he had had them, but it had been at least several days since he'd been to the gym because he couldn't afford to pay his membership anymore. But Robert appeared pretty emotionless to his interviewers. Instead of being angry about being questioned, he was matter-of-fact and very flat. He had a simple explanation for where he was when Kelly disappeared, and he stuck to that story. Questioning continued into the night, but Robert never faltered. He said that after his brother and his 2 friends got home from school, He had returned to his room to watch television. He said he could smell marijuana coming from his brother's room, and he could hear them playing Nintendo.
Eventually, Robert did change one thing about his story. At first, he had said that he hadn't been in the basement of that house for about 2 weeks. Then he changed that and said that he could have been in the basement a couple days earlier. Now, he did agree to a polygraph, but this turned out to be inconclusive. And according to the test administrator, Robert appeared to be intentionally moving around in order to skew the results. Meanwhile, the house is still being processed. An antique rifle was found with blood stains on the butt of the gun. It may have been used to beat Kelly about her face. And when her clothing was examined, more than 10 puncture wounds were found in her jacket. The size and shape of these matched the bayonet that had also been found in the basement.
In the autopsy, 200 distinct blows to her head were identified. The damage to her face was so severe that the ME couldn't determine if it was the rifle butt that caused it. And although Kelly had a deeply cut throat, she had also been strangled with her own bra. They also found a circular wound in her neck that matched the bayonet, which meant that she had been beaten in a violent frenzy, and that the handle of the neck had actually been pushed into her because the killer had been putting all of his weight on her. So the police believed that only a very strong man could have done this.
I would think.
Unless it was 2 people, but they didn't think that.
So the final cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation due to mechanical trauma and strangulation. Now, her entire body was bruised, meaning that she had been alive for much of the beating, because after death, the body's not going to bruise because there's no blood flow.
Right.
In a press conference on Sunday, reporters were told that the entire investigation was in the Golub house. They were convinced that someone in the house was involved in Kelly's murder. Now, Elizabeth and John Sr. had alibis, and John Jay's friends insisted that John Jay was not out of their sight long enough to have participated in the crime. So we've eliminated everybody except for Robert.
Well, I wouldn't say that John Jay was eliminated, but the focus was definitely on Robert.
Definitely.
On Sunday night, police learned that a 6-year-old neighbor girl had some information for them, and the parents told them that their daughter had been playing with Harry Finney on Friday, and she said she had seen Kelly enter the Golub house. When the girl was questioned, she said that she had seen Kelly calling for help on the 2nd floor of the house. But it was decided that this was just her imagination getting away from her. The other kids said that she had never gone close enough to the side of the house to see in that window. And in fact, many children in the neighborhood were very confused and were having bad dreams about the murder.
I'm sure they did.
And young children, as you know, can really easily mix up reality and imagination.
Yes, they can.
So in a Monday press conference, the police announced that John Jay's friends had been eliminated as suspects, but both of the Golub brothers were still suspects. After interviewing neighbors and classmates, a better picture of who John J. Golub was emerged, and this was interesting. He had a reputation as a bully, a kid who would go out of his way to harass and frighten the younger kids. Just months before the murder, he had handcuffed a younger boy to his garage door and left him, and he'd said that that was just a joke. But John Jay also kept knives and a hunting bow in his room. Some children claimed that he had shot it through his bedroom window once, and he had bragged about it. Even though both John Jay and Robert denied any knowledge that the bayonet had existed, children in the neighborhood would tell stories of visiting that house and seeing Robert show off and play with that weapon. Also, John Jay had bragged to a group of kids that he had killed a dog with a knife. And there were rumors that Robert killed a dog with a bow and arrow. So we don't know if all of these stories were true, but it really seemed that both brothers had some issues with violence, and they could be seen as dangerous.
Now, Kelly's funeral was held on a Wednesday, 3 days after her 14th birthday. Kelly's closest friends wrote something in her memory, and it had been read over the PA system at school. It read, "Dear Kelly, sometimes the hardest word to say is goodbye. You are a very caring, feeling, and emotional person. You are special. We remember the way you always moved your hair to the side. We remember you waving to your friends through classroom doors. We wanted you to remember your 14th birthday with happiness. You were the prettiest, most delightful friend. We love you, Kel. We'll miss you. Goodbye from all of us.
So that has to be so hard for these girls that were her friends. And that changes who they are, doesn't it? If you lose a friend that violently when you're a child?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you lose a lot of innocence.
You do. Now, people were learning that Kelly and John Jay knew each other better than her family had thought. Neighbors said that they'd seen them speaking on the sidewalk, and one witness claimed that she had seen Kelly and John Jay walking down Horton Road holding hands. It seems that they might have been casual friends, maybe even a little more than casual friends if they're hand-holding. But Kelly's family was surprised to hear about this.
I know, but I just kind of feel like all this was going on. The neighborhood is like in an uproar, and people start remembering stuff that really didn't happen. It's like human nature to want to get yourself inserted in these tragedies. So I don't know, if you're talking about teenagers and kids, I wouldn't 100% believe it. I wouldn't say it's totally not true, but it wouldn't change my mind too much about things. So John Golub Sr. told his sons to stop cooperating with the police. 1 week after Kelly's death, he told a reporter that his sons were innocent, and he was worried someone would hurt his family. There was such outrage against them. People were referring to the Golubs' house as the death house, and John Golub suggested that someone may have snuck into his house to commit Kelly's murder. To me, that's completely far-fetched. Do you see any kind of credibility in that idea?
Oh, no. I mean, he's grasping at straws, trying to protect his son.
Well, I can understand that to a certain degree, but that just doesn't even seem like possible to me.
Well, no, I mean, what are the odds of that? Some unknown person, or maybe not unknown, but somebody was watching Kelly or watching the Golub house and saw Kelly enter and then snuck into the house and killed her?
Well, that wouldn't explain why she entered in the first place, and I'm quite convinced that the phone call asked her to come over and she was lured there.
Yeah.
Whether it was Robert or John Jay, I'm not sure. I lean toward Robert, but I really can't see that it would be someone who didn't live in the house, especially in that environment, dragging her down through that mess into the basement and doing it.
Yep.
Very hard to believe. The case had media attention from the beginning, of course, and in the newspaper, secrets of the Golubs' lives were shared. I mean, life inside this house was far from what neighbors had imagined from the outside. Elizabeth said she was a collector, and her closet was filled with clothing, but a lot of it didn't even fit any family members. She just bought it because it was on sale or whatever. And that's hoarder behavior, I know, but it's just hard to understand. The clutter and filth in the house became public knowledge, as did the fact that the family members ate individually in their rooms. Also, that both of the sons were doing drugs on a daily basis.
Yeah, now, looking at Robert, since high school graduation, he had held just one job. So this is like 3 years, right? He's 21?
Yes, 21.
He held just one job as a delivery man, but he lost this job because he kept getting traffic tickets. Now, he was using steroids to bulk himself up, and many people knew him as a juice addict. Robert had worked out for at least 3 hours a day. After he lost his job, he could no longer afford to go to the gym. So he hung around the house reading magazines, including hardcore pornography. In addition to the porno magazines, there's a videotape of a pornographic movie also found in his room. Now, this video is from the 50s. In it, a naked woman is having sex with a drug dealer when she's caught by her boyfriend. She goes into the bathroom and stumbles out moments later, covered in blood. Then she dies on the floor. End of movie.
So that's super creepy.
Say the least.
It's almost like a snuff film, isn't it?
Yeah.
So even though Robert was calm and flat with the police, he was known to have a violent temper. 2 years earlier, he had lost a bodybuilding competition, and he became enraged, smashed the trophy, and refused to go on stage with the other contestants. So he was barred from future competitions. So roid rage is a real possibility in Kelly's murder. But unfortunately, the police hadn't tested him for steroids at the time.
Well, yeah, but that's not going to help you.
The testing?
Yeah.
Well, I think it would be good evidence if you could say to a jury that he had this many steroids in his system.
But nobody knows how much is too much steroid. I mean, so yes, he had steroids.
Sure, but I'm thinking you can't bring it up at all if you don't have any proof that he was on it. I guess you can bring up the stuff you find in his room related to it. But I just think it gives it a little more credibility to say he was on steroids. Not a big deal. I agree. It's not a big deal. So his father owned a service station, and he would have gladly given Robert a job. But you know what? Robert had refused, which I find unbelievable. You're that lucky that your parents going to give you a job, and you turn it down and you're unemployed for months? I don't think my dad would have let me keep living in the house if I could have worked for him and I chose to stay home. And his excuse was he didn't want to get his hands dirty.
Aw.
So isn't that, that's just yucky.
So after this murder, the atmosphere of the neighborhood on Horton Road changed considerably, became very tense. And although the Golub kids have been named as suspects, no arrest has been made. Patrol of 2 police officers was assigned to do shifts on the road, and officers even stood watch in the backyards of some residents.
Over 400 pieces of evidence had been removed from the Golub house, and over 200 photos had been taken. The sink, the bath, the shower drains had all been removed to test them for blood. Even the sump pump and the hose drain pipe from their washing machine had been taken out in case any clothing worn by Kelly's killer had been put in to wash. Also, bedding was taken and vacuumed for hair. There was 1 strand of long brown hair found, but hair identification is not an exact science, unless you have the bulb of the hair. If a hair follicle or a drop of blood other than Kelly's could be found, the case might be solved. But DNA at this point was still pretty early. They could use it, but it took a lot more. You had to have a lot more of a sample than you do now.
You certainly did. John Golub and his sons were all type O blood. Elizabeth Golub was type B, so she's eliminated right away. John Golub was eliminated after more in-depth testing, but both John J. and Robert met the initial matches. So further testing established that blood found other than Kelly's was found in the basement, and it was either John J.'s or Robert's, with a likelihood of 1 in 400.
Which sounds like a not very good numbers, especially thinking from nowadays. But even thinking 1 in 400 are pretty good odds, because how many people have been in that house? Probably not 400.
No, but still, it's not that huge a number.
Right, it's not going to be that convincing to a jury.
Right.
But more importantly, these tests eliminated every other person known to be at the house, other than John J. or Robert Golub.
Now, detectives also hoped that the nicks and cuts on Robert's hands had bled enough to identify his blood in a scene which had been inundated with Kelly's blood. Multiple blood samples were sent off to the state lab for more sophisticated testing. But when the police department administrators heard about the cost of testing, further DNA testing was rejected.
Yeah, so that was a big bump in the road. And meanwhile, neighbors are panicking. Detectives and others involved in investigations attended meetings and listened to the speculation from the neighbors who really wanted an arrest in this case. The pressure to make an arrest was growing each day. Detectives knew that there was the risk of vigilante justice as long as Robert and John J. were free. But they really didn't have evidence that John J. had been involved, other than the child witness who claimed to have seen him let Kelly into the house. And Robert had been under surveillance since Kelly's murder. So finally, the chief of police agreed to cover the costs of more detailed DNA analysis. If the arrest was made before it was completed, the prosecutor would have to present evidence at a preliminary hearing before they were ready. So they wanted to hold off on the arrest until the blood testing was completed and they couldn't be scrutinized negatively by the grand jury. So the Golubs' house was released back to them following processing by the crime scene unit. John Sr. had been returning to the house daily to check on the condition of the house and to pick up things the family needed. But aside from that, the Golub family had not been seen on Horton Road for a while. But John Sr.'s visits were a cause for trouble. The neighbors called police when they saw him. They didn't care that he had the right to go to his own house. They wanted that entire Golub family kicked out of the neighborhood for good. They were not having it, any part of that family.
Yeah, and I can understand how people would feel that way, right?
Well, I don't know. Do you really criticize the whole family, though?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I see it.
Particularly, maybe they're not blaming all of them, but they've found out the condition of the interior of the house.
Sure.
And how they don't eat meals together and stuff like that. So once they get to know more about this family, they find out they're weirder and weirder than they thought.
Yeah, but weird doesn't make you a criminal.
Well,
I mean, if you're a hoarder and you eat dinner in your room, it doesn't mean you're a bad person.
No, it doesn't.
It's very judgmental. But you know what I can see?
I'll grant that, but still.
But what I can see is that, would you want to be in a house where a girl had been brutally murdered and there's probably still blood in the basement and stuff? That I would judge them for more than the hoarding.
Yeah, but again, my point was there was enough stuff going on, not just with the two boys, but the whole family, that they all get included in my disapproval.
Yeah, but disapproving is so different from blaming for a murder. I mean, that's a big, wide area there between the two. Yes, you can disapprove of someone's filthy house or that they don't eat with their family, but that's just so far off from someone brutally killing a girl.
No, but the whole family gets painted with the same brush.
Obviously, yes, they did. I mean, a girl's body had been found in that house, and 4 people had been there with the body. So neighbors thought it should have been easy for police to figure out who was responsible and make an arrest. And many neighbors were angry. They felt that the safety of their families was not being considered, and the kids in the neighborhood are having emotional issues. So I can see why seeing any member of that family, especially for the Tinnis family, would be upsetting. I mean, I certainly don't blame them for being upset. They have every right to be upset.
No. Detectives would meet with Victoria and Richard Tinnis every day in order to give them a progress report. And these visits would last up to 3 hours. Richard Tinnis was skeptical, wanting to make sure that everything that should have been done was being done in terms of solving this case.
Sure.
Now, he believed that the entire Golub family was implicated in Kelly's death, so tensions continuing to grow.
Well, sure. Then on Saturday, March 18th, the Golubs drove up their driveway around dinner time. The house had just been released by the police, and it would have been a problem if Elizabeth and John Sr. returned to their house. But unfortunately, they had brought John J. and Robert back with them, so this was more than a problem. This was an outrage. Neighbors arranged a vigil that night, standing quietly across the street from the Golub house. Just that day, neighbors had learned about the 6-year-old girl who claimed to have witnessed Kelly screaming in the upstairs window of the Golub house. And even worse, this child was embellishing her story, and it was getting around the neighborhood. The girl had claimed that she had seen the entire Golub family dancing around Kelly's body with knives in their hands. So this story incited real hatred for the entire family.
Yeah, now this is almost too fantastic to believe.
It is. I agree.
I might listen to this little 6-year-old saying that she had seen Kelly in an upstairs window, but saying she'd seen the Golub family dancing around her with knives?
Well, and the girl was seen by other kids that she didn't even get close enough to the house to have seen that. So it's like the rumor mill is just kind of running wild.
That's right. Now, in the morning, the crowd in front of the death house had grown. The crowd moved to the sidewalk right in front of the house. And by noontime, there were more than 75 people standing there staring and glaring at the house.
So that would be terrifying if you're in that house.
It would. I'd be worried for my safety.
Absolutely. It was over 2 weeks since Kelly's murder, and at 11:30 a.m., Robert came out of the house to walk to the local market. But he was followed by over 40 people who believed he had murdered Kelly, and by the time he reached the market, he was in a full run, and television cameras had joined this neighborhood mob. I mean, if this had been years and years ago, he would have been chased with pitchforks and set on fire or tarred and feathered.
He probably
or
would have
lynched,
been.
yes.
Yeah.
Robert ran into the market and stared at the crowd through the glass, and they began chanting, "Devil, devil, devil." This is really creepy.
It is.
A plainclothes officer who'd been watching Robert stood between Robert and the crowd to protect him, and uniformed officers were called to accompany him back to the house. But back at the house, the crowd had gotten even bigger and more hostile. Now they were shouting, "Murderers, devil raisers, devil people." It's getting really out of control. So within an hour, Robert and John Jay were taken from the house in their sister's car with their suitcases. And as the car drove off, the crowd applauded. This had to be such a sight to see. I can just imagine it in my mind. It's quite a thing.
You know, one thing that the neighborhood might have forgotten was the other kids in the neighborhood and their mental health. So they're witnessing their parents' friends doing this stuff.
I know.
So many of them are having nightmares and crying outbursts. It is tough for the little kids.
Oh, sure. Well, even the older kids, even the 13-year-olds that were friends with her. I mean, you're not really that mature at that age. This has to be so overwhelming, and I just hope that they were getting counseling. Because a lot of the parents in the neighborhood weren't thinking about that. They just wanted justice. And, you know, in fairness, they were worried about their kids being murdered because the murderer had not been arrested.
Right. And it's a random act, basically.
Basically, so, out of nowhere.
Who knows?
Right. But, you know, most of the neighbors did agree that bringing John Jay and Robert back to that house had been a big mistake. Even the ones who understood that Elizabeth and John Sr. weren't responsible for everything their sons did felt that they should keep the boys away from the neighborhood for everybody's well-being.
You know, when the police told Richard Tinnis that Robert Golub was going to be the only suspect arrested, he was disappointed because he believed that all 4 family members were involved or at least had knowledge of the murder.
Well, that idea had kind of gone viral around the neighborhood. And you could see if you're a father that's had such a horrible loss, you'd be so angry. I could totally see why he might think that.
The grand jury presentation was a little more involved than usual. Normally, one police officer would testify about the evidence they had, but in this case, a series of witnesses took the stand. The case was filled with both circumstantial and forensic evidence. An indictment was handed down, and Robert Golub was arrested for second-degree murder.
Yeah, I haven't been able to find out why it wasn't first-degree murder, because I really believe that she was lured there for that express purpose.
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah, I haven't been able to find out why they went that way. But Robert was in Manhattan with his older sister while the grand jury was meeting, but they did still have police watching him. He went to a department store with his sister, and he managed to lose the police by leaving through a back door. So he wasn't arrested, and the Tinnis family was very upset. Then Robert's attorney called the police and said that Robert would surrender at the station the next day. But the police didn't want it to go that way. They wanted to take him down, put him in cuffs, and haul him in.
Yeah, we want to do a perp walk here.
Absolutely. They've been after this guy, and this is a horrible crime. But by the next morning, they still hadn't found him, so Robert was able to turn himself in as the media watched and were hollering questions at him. He entered a not guilty plea and was held in custody until his trial, and he was placed in isolation for his own protection. Soon afterward, Newsday published a story about how Robert Golub once took a mail-order taxidermy course, which taught him how to gut and dress a deer. So this was really creepy when you consider the condition of Kelly's mutilated body. So police believed he had planned to dismember and remove Kelly from the house in small pieces, but he hadn't gotten to it. It was a savage killing, and after murdering her, he would have been tired and maybe unable to finish the job. So once the frenzy had ended, which is how it frequently is in these types of murders, he wasn't able to follow through, so he just hit her the best he could and cleaned up. Then he went to his room and fell into a deep sleep, and Elizabeth woke him for dinner from that deep sleep.
So once the police had him in custody, Robert was required to give teeth impressions. So they're going to be examining these impressions and comparing them to marks on Kelly's body. Bite marks have been found on her back and buttocks. Now, since this case, I think it was just a few years ago, 2016 or so, reports have come out saying that bite mark evidence is basically junk science. The President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology found that bite mark analysis does not meet the scientific standards for foundational validity, and is actually far from meeting such standards. So available scientific evidence at that time showed that examiners can't consistently agree on whether an injury is a human bite mark, and they can't identify the source of a bite mark with any degree of reasonable accuracy.
Well, bite mark analysis is conducted by forensic dentists, and it really relies on two foundational premises. First, that human dentition is as unique as DNA, and second, that human skin is a suitable medium to record this impression, and neither of these have been proven. Still, bite mark analysis has been used in criminal cases to match individuals to alleged bites, and this is since the 1950s. At least 25 wrongful arrests or convictions have been linked to bite mark analysis, and there are more cases still pending in the courts. This is all according to the Innocence Project. Still, many forensic dentists have remained very defensive of their practice, and they continue to say that bite mark evidence is a valid science. So back to this case, this was 1989, and the court issued an order for bite impressions to be taken for the case against Robert Golub, and this evidence would be used in his trial.
Now, the firm that had performed the DNA testing, remember they were doing some testing, and then the administration said, no, we can't afford it.
Right.
Stop, and then it got started up again.
Yeah.
So this company that did the testing had been founded just 7 years earlier. Now, the first forensic DNA testing had been performed in 1986. So in 1989, DNA matches had only been used in about 2,000 cases. It was accepted in 27 states at the time, but it was pretty controversial. Most of the controversy was due to the human handling of the samples, which left defense attorneys the ability to criticize processing, subjective analysis, and mishandling.
Well, yeah, look at the OJ case, right?
Point
a lot
taken.
of that defense was based on the way the DNA evidence had been handled.
You got it.
And people were really mad at the police for the mistakes they made. But looking back, those mistakes didn't change the fact that his DNA and Nicole's DNA and Ron Goldman's DNA were all together.
That they were.
But let's not get into that.
No, I'll just get frustrated.
But it's a very good example, isn't it, of how defense attorneys could deal with DNA evidence.
Oh, sure.
Especially in the beginning.
That's your job.
Yeah.
So Richard and Victoria Tinnis gave an in-depth interview before the trial. They said they were a little relieved that Robert had been arrested, but they weren't satisfied, thinking that he was the only guilty person in the family.
Yeah, John Jay moved back with his parents, but he was still considered a suspect. And the next night, a pellet was shot through a bathroom window in their house. So after that, he was sent away to a boarding school. But Elizabeth and John Sr. remained in the house, and life on Horton Road continued to deteriorate. Religious groups passed out flyers telling the residents that the apocalypse had arrived, and strangers drove or walked down the street to gawk at the Golub house. Elizabeth and John were mostly ignored, but many people were still angry with them, and they thought the only decent thing for them to do was to move away. Now I can see that, but maybe they can't afford to move. They said they couldn't afford to move, and I don't see who would buy that house is one issue. And I wonder if they made an effort to clean it up and sell it. I don't know. But Newsday ran an editorial asking neighbors to stop blaming the parents for what their son had allegedly done. But it was kind of ironic because it was the articles in Newsday that were contributing to the anger of the neighbors by bringing all these things up over and over again. Newsday was getting a lot of mileage out of this story for themselves. And then they tell the neighbors to stop it?
Yeah.
Very hypocritical.
Just a bit. So the murder trial began in February 1990. It was shown on a local all-news channel. Robert Golub wore a three-piece navy suit with a white shirt and a tie. And he certainly didn't look like a killer. Well, that's what you're supposed to do, right?
Sure, of course.
So Richard Tinnis, Kelly's dad, was the first one to take the stand. He didn't have much to say as far as evidence was concerned, but he was able to show the jury how Kelly's murder had destroyed her family. And he described the search for Kelly and getting the horrible news of her murder.
Yeah, and really not a dry eye in the house, except maybe Robert Golub and his attorneys. It was really heartbreaking testimony.
Now, witnesses testified that they had seen Kelly enter the Golub house that day. Telephone records were admitted into evidence showing the call from the Golub house to the Tinnis house that Friday. It had gone through at 2:50 in the afternoon, and it had lasted 55 seconds.
So this is significant to me, because remember, Robert Golub was saying, oh, Kelly called for John Jay 2 or 3 times a day every day. Well, there was no evidence that she had ever called there. The only calls from the Tinnis to the Golub house was when the family was looking for Kelly. But now we have a confirmed call at the time when Richie said the call came from someone named John for Kelly. So to me, that's very important evidence.
It certainly is.
Now, they had made up a whole model of the Golub house and used it, along with the photos of the basement, to show the jury what had occurred and what they believed occurred. But the photos of Kelly were so disturbing that some jurors cried and some turned away from them. I mean, you really can't say enough, Dick, what a horrible, violent crime this was to a 13-year-old girl.
Well, just reading the description earlier, holy cow.
Yeah, and we give a pretty general description. We could have gone into a lot more detail, but it's just horrific.
It certainly is. Now, there were some outbursts in the courtroom between the Golubs and the Tinnis family. One time, when Robert looked back and smiled at his family, one of the Tinnis family members yelled at him to turn around. And during one lunch break, Tinnis family and supporters had a shouting match with the Golubs.
Yeah, there's actually pictures of them yelling at each other from the local newspaper. And the DNA testing had come back and was very damning. Blood had been found in the basement that matched Robert Golub, with a pattern in a random population of 1 in 707 million.
So that's a little bit different than the 1 in 400 that they were starting with.
Pretty convincing numbers, yeah.
Yeah, well, now it's more sophisticated. You get it 1 chance in a trillion.
Sure, but I'm pretty convinced. Once you get over 1 million, I'm pretty convinced.
Well, 1 in 700 million?
Yeah.
More than the whole population of the United States.
Right.
So this DNA evidence was strongly scrutinized by the defense, as was the forensic odontologist's claim that the marks on Kelly had been made by Golub's teeth with a 99.9% certainty.
Yeah, but we don't think we're really believing that from our earlier discussion.
I'm going to stick with the DNA evidence.
Well, it's a lot stronger. I think with that DNA evidence, you don't need the teeth, but...
No. But again, at the time of this trial, bite marks were considered things that were evidentiary.
Yes, they definitely were. I remember they were used back in the Bundy trial quite a bit.
So Robert Golub didn't testify in his own defense, although he later argued that he should have done it, but didn't because his attorney advised him not to. On April 7, 1990, Golub was found guilty of second-degree murder and was sentenced to 25 years to life. Now, his appeals were all denied. He's had parole hearings since then. In 2013 was his first parole hearing. He was denied. He had a hearing again in 2015, denied again, 2017, denied again, and 2019, denied again.
Yeah, that one was just a week or 2 ago?
Very recently.
Yeah. Well, for a long time, Richard and Victoria Tinnis really held to the belief that John Jay had assisted his brother in the murder of Kelly. So 2 well-known experts examined the autopsy report, Michael Baden and Lawrence Kobylinski, and neither saw any proof that 2 people had committed Kelly's murder. But it didn't prove that it was one person either, so her parents still aren't convinced that John Jay wasn't involved.
Well, he was home.
He was home part of the time, but his friends left with him, and then Robert was alone in the house. So I don't know. I mean, I think if John Jay was involved, he just knew about it. I don't think he actually had any physical involvement in it. I feel like if he had any involvement, it was just that he lied to cover things up for his brother.
He did that, but he was the one that witnesses said had opened the door for Kelly to enter the house.
Well, the 6-year-old boy did, and then the 6-year-old girl who had kind of gotten confused did. Shannon, the older girl that was Kelly's age, hadn't seen who let him in.
She couldn't tell who let
her in, right.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, that's kind of hard to tell from a distance who's letting her into the house. But I could see that John Jay may have lured her over there. Absolutely. and could have been aware of what was going on. I mean, he didn't seem like a very nice kid.
Yeah, I mean, you could, I think, say that his older brother, Robert, said, call up that little girl up the street, invite her over.
And then leave us alone and leave?
Yeah, something like that.
Sure. But, none of John Jay's blood or anything was found, so I don't think he was actually a participant.
Yeah, no, I think that's likely true.
But yeah, I wouldn't put it past the father either to cover up.
Sure.
I don't know about Elizabeth, because Elizabeth and Robert had some different times in their stories, and it was only an hour or so difference, but I don't know. I think that could show that someone wasn't telling the truth, which would probably have been Robert anyway, not Elizabeth.
Right.
I mean, she seemed like a decent person. I know you hate that her house was messy and they didn't eat together.
Oh, I don't hate that. It's just strange stuff to me.
I know. But it doesn't make her a bad person necessarily. And I can certainly have sympathy for what she's gone through.
Yes.
Hasn't been easy for her. Not at all. So this is a fascinating story that I first read about in a New York Times article. And the article is called What Happened on Horton Road by Evelyn Neves. It was written in May of 1998. And there were also other articles on the case. There's also a book written on this case titled Against Her Will, The Senseless Murder of Kelly Ann Tinnis, and that was written by Ronald J. Watkins. We also used an article titled White House Report Concludes That Bite Mark Analysis is Junk Science, and that was written by Jordan Smith in September of 2016. Thank you to Tristan Capel for our TCB theme music.
And thank you to Anne for suggesting this case.
Yes, thank you, Anne.
Fascinating.
And congratulations for Dick for writing down who suggested the case. Good progress.
I'm getting there.
Yeah, no, I'm serious. Good progress. It's hard to remember all these little things. A quick reminder, if you enjoy our podcast, you should really consider joining Team Tie Grabber. Subscribing as a Tie Grabber is a great way to show your support for the podcast and get commercial-free, members-only episodes of True Crime Brewery. We've been having a lot of fun lately with these episodes, including our most recent episode on Adrian Reynolds. Now, of course, talking about the case is not fun. It's a horrible case, but we certainly learned a lot about it. So it was very interesting to research and to talk about. Other recent episodes have included the case of killers Christopher Wilder and the notorious John List, plus the wife-killing preacher A.B. Shermer, and the parent killer Christopher Porco, and the honor killing of Jossie Sidhu. But there are many more. I think we have close to 40 members-only episodes. And if you join, of course, you get access to all of them. To join Tie Grabber, just go to tiegrabber.com and click on subscribe, and you can be a member for as little as $4 a month. As a member, in addition to your special commercial-free episodes, you get to pick a gift which we'll happily send you with a handwritten thank you note. And some of the things I add in with the gifts are magnets, stickers, pins, all kinds of really good swag. We really love our members, and we want to thank you all for your support, for listening, just for everything, and that includes feedback. So if you have a case suggestion, a comment, an opinion, or a question, you can contact us by voicemail. Just go to our website, tiegrabber.com, and click on Leave a Voicemail, and then you can record your own voicemail to us. If you don't want to do that, you can send us an email and send that to truecrimebrewery@tiegrabber.com. So we're foregoing feedback this week. It's a pretty long episode, so I thought this would be a good week to take a break from that. And also we have next week off, so we can spend some time with family and still be able to put out an episode on Christmas Eve. We thought this would be a good way to do it, to take a different week off, because a lot of shows take Christmas week off. So we'll be there for you on Christmas Eve, but next week we're not going to be around.
No, we won't. We'll also be here on New Year's Eve.
Right. Aren't we good little kids?
We are.
Okay. Anything else to add, Dickie?
I am done adding.
Okay. Well, thank you to everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time at the quiet end.
We're saving places for you. Hurry up and get here.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.